white-clapboard houses of Bennington, Vermont, stood silent in the fading light of October 2006. Smoke curled from chimneys. Leaves blanketed the sidewalks in shades of amber and rust. It was the kind of New England town where neighbors knew each other's names, where children played freely in yards bordered by stone walls built 2 centuries prior, where the local diner served the same coffee to the same faces every morning at 7 sharp. But on the evening of October 12th, 2006, something shifted in that quiet place. 12-year-old Michelle Hartley never came home from school. Her bicycle was found leaning against a maple tree 3 blocks from her house, her backpack still in the front basket. A half-eaten granola bar wrapped in its foil on top of her math homework. The streets that had felt so safe suddenly felt hollow. The question that would haunt this town for years began that night, whispered in living rooms and shouted across search grids cut through the surrounding woods. Where was Michelle Hartley, and who had taken her? Bennington sits in the southwestern corner of Vermont, pressed against the Green Mountains, like a bookmark in an old novel. Population hovering just above 15,000. The kind of place where the high school football games drew crowds that rivaled Sunday church attendance. Mill work had sustained the town through the 20th century, and when the mills closed, the community adapted. Small businesses, tourism from leaf peepers driving up Route 7, a liberal arts college on the hill that brought in fresh faces every fall.
The Hartley family had lived there for 3 generations. Michelle's grandfather had worked at the paper mill before it shuttered in 1989. Her father, Robert Hartley, managed a hardware store on Main Street. Her mother, Patricia, worked part-time at the elementary school library, Risha, viewing books and reading stories to kindergartners who sat cross-legged on a worn carpet square. They lived in a modest 2-story colonial on Maple Ridge Road, painted cream with dark green shutters, a detached garage that Robert had converted into a workshop where he built birdhouses and small furniture pieces on weekends. Michelle was the middle child. Her older brother, David, was 15 and played trumpet in the school band. Her younger sister, Emma, was 9 and collected rocks she found in the yard, labeling them with masking tape and keeping them in shoeboxes under her bed. Michelle herself was quiet but not shy. Teachers described her as thoughtful. She kept a journal with a purple cover that locked with a tiny brass key she wore on a chain around her neck. She liked to draw horses and trees. She was in 7th grade at Bennington Middle School, a brick building constructed in 1968 with narrow hallways that smelled like floor wax and cafeteria steam. Her favorite subject was English. She struggled with algebra but never complained. Friends said she was kind, the kind of kid who would share her lunch if someone forgot theirs, the kind who noticed when someone sat alone. October 12, 2006 was a Thursday. The weather had turned cold that week. Frost-coated windshields in the mornings. The sky that day was gray, low clouds threatening rain but holding it back. Michelle woke at 6:30, like she did every school day. Patricia heard her moving around upstairs, the creak of floorboards, the sound of the bathroom faucet running. She came downstairs at 7 in jeans and a navy blue hoodie with the school's Panther logo on the front. She ate cereal at the kitchen table while Emma complained about having to wear tights under her dress. David had already left for school. He had jazz band practice before first period. Robert had left for work at 6:45. Patricia poured coffee into a travel mug and reminded Michelle to bring her permission slip for the field trip next week. Michelle nodded. She put her bowl in the sink. She grabbed her backpack from the hook by the door. Her bicycle was in the garage. A red 10-speed with a dent in the front fender from when she'd hit a pothole the previous summer. Patricia watched through the kitchen window as Michelle wheeled the bike down the driveway. It was 7:23. The morning felt ordinary, completely ordinary. Patricia turned back to the dishes. School started at 7:50. Michelle's first class was social studies with Mr. Brennan in room 204. Attendance was taken at 7:52. Michelle was marked present. She sat in the third row, second seat from the window. The day proceeded without incident. Social studies, English, science. Lunch at 11:30. Michelle sat with the same group of friends she always did. They talked about a movie coming out that weekend. One girl mentioned trying out for the spring musical. Michelle said she might audition for backstage crew. The afternoon classes passed. Math at 1:15. Art at 2:10. The final bell rang at 3:05. This was when the timeline became crucial, when every minute mattered. Michelle walked out of the building with two friends, Sarah Chen and Rebecca Morrison. They talked in the parking lot where parents waited in idling cars. Sarah's mother picked Sarah up at 3:12. Rebecca walked home in the opposite direction from Michelle. She later told investigators she waved goodbye to Michelle at 3:15, right at the corner of School Street and Harmon Avenue. Michelle was getting on her bicycle. She was alone. The route from school to Michelle's house was 1.7 miles. It followed School Street for 4 blocks, turned left onto Prospect, followed Prospect for 8 blocks past the old Congregational Church with its white spire, then turned right onto Maple Ridge. Michelle had ridden this route hundreds of times. On a bicycle, even riding slowly, it should have taken no more than 12 to 15 minutes. Patricia expected Michelle home by 3:30 at the latest, 3:45 if she stopped to talk to friends. By 4 o'clock, Patricia began to feel the first stirrings of concern. By 4:15, she called Michelle's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. Patricia tried not to worry. Maybe Michelle had gone to a friend's house and forgotten to call. It happened. She was 12, but Patricia called Sarah's mother anyway. No, Sarah said Michelle hadn't mentioned going anywhere after school. Patricia called Rebecca's house. Same answer. By 4:30, Patricia called Robert at the hardware store. He said he'd drive the route, look for her. Maybe she'd gotten a flat tire. Maybe she was walking the bike home. Robert got in his truck and drove slowly along the route Michelle would have taken. School Street, Prospect, the church, Maple Ridge, nothing, no sign of her. He turned around and drove it again, slower this time, scanning the sidewalks, the yards, the spaces between houses. When he reached the corner of Prospect and Elm, 3 blocks from the school, he saw it. The red bicycle, leaning against the thick trunk of a maple tree, its leaves mostly fallen now, scattered around the base. The bike looked carefully positioned. Not thrown down or dropped, placed. Robert pulled over. His heart hammered in his chest as he got out of the truck. The backpack was in the front basket. He opened it. Books, notebooks, a pencil case. The granola bar on top partially eaten. Michelle's phone was in the small front pocket. The battery was dead. Robert looked around. Houses lined the street on both sides. A quiet neighborhood. Cars in driveways. Porch lights beginning to come on as dusk approached. He knocked on the door of the nearest house. An older woman answered. No, she hadn't seen anything unusual, hadn't heard anything. Robert called Patricia. Then he called the police. Clear's throat. The Bennington Police Department received the call at 5:07 that evening. Officer Daniel Marsh arrived at the scene at 5:14. By 5:30, additional units had arrived. The bicycle was photographed where it stood. The backpack was secured. Officers began canvassing the neighborhood immediately. Did you see a girl on a red bicycle this afternoon? Did you see any vehicles that seemed out of place? Did you hear anything unusual? Most people had been at work. Those who were home had seen nothing. Heard nothing. One man, Timothy Voss, who lived 2 houses down from where the bicycle was found, said he'd been in his garage working on his car around 3:30. He thought he might have heard voices outside, but he couldn't be sure. He hadn't looked. He'd been focused on replacing a timing belt. By 6 o'clock, darkness had settled over Bennington. The temperature dropped into the 30s. Search teams were being organized. The police chief, Margaret Norton, arrived to coordinate efforts. The state police were notified. Within an hour, volunteers were gathering at the middle school. Parents, teachers, shopkeepers. The hardware store closed early. Robert stood in the parking lot trying to answer questions he didn't have answers to. What was Michelle wearing? Navy blue hoodie, jeans, white sneakers. Did she have any identifying marks? A small scar on her left knee from falling off her bike 2 years ago. Was there anyone who might want to hurt her? No. God, no. Everyone loved Michelle. Patricia arrived with Emma. David came with a friend's parents who'd picked him up from after-school practice. The family stood together under the sodium lights of the parking lot, surrounded by strangers who wanted to help, and the world felt unrecognizable. The search began in earnest at 7:15. Teams of 10 to 15 people fanned out from the location where the bicycle had been found. They walked in grid patterns, calling Michelle's name. Flashlights swept through yards and empty lots. They checked behind garages and inside tool sheds. They walked the trail that ran along the creek behind the church. The search continued through the night. By midnight, over 200 people were involved. Police brought in dogs. The dogs tracked a scent from the bicycle south along Prospect for 2 blocks. Then the trail went cold at the curb in front of a brick ranch house. As if Michelle had gotten into a vehicle there. The dogs circled and whined but couldn't pick up the trail again. The sun rose on Friday, October 13, over a town transformed by fear. The search expanded. State police helicopters flew grid patterns over the surrounding woods. Dive teams were called to search the reservoir 4 miles north of town. The media arrived. News vans from Burlington, from Albany. By Friday afternoon, the story had gone national. A 12-year-old girl missing in small-town Vermont. Her face appeared on television screens across the country. The photo they used showed Michelle smiling, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing the purple hoodie she'd worn for school picture day the month before. Tips began pouring in. Someone thought they saw a girl matching her description at a gas station in Brattleboro. Investigated. Not her. Someone else reported a suspicious vehicle near the school. A white panel van with out-of-state plates. Police tracked it down. The driver was a contractor from Massachusetts working on a renovation project. His timeline checked out. He'd been at the work site all afternoon, had witnesses. For those who have ever lived through the disappearance of someone they love, the waiting is its own kind of agony. The not knowing. The minutes that stretch into hours that stretch into days. Patricia stopped sleeping. She sat at the kitchen table through the nights, Michelle's journal in her hands, reading entries about ordinary things, complaints about homework, descriptions of funny things that happened at lunch. Nothing that explained anything. Nothing that helped. Robert spent his days with the search teams and his nights driving the roads around Bennington, unable to sit still, unable to accept that his daughter had simply vanished. David became quiet. He stopped going to school. He sat in his room and didn't play his trumpet. Emma had nightmares and crawled into her parents' bed every night, though there was rarely anyone in it. The family was fracturing under the weight of absence. Part 2. The investigation. The investigation moved methodically through every possibility. Detective Sarah Lindholm from the Vermont State Police took the lead. She was 42, 15 years on the force, experienced in cases involving missing children. She set up a command center at the police station, covering the walls with maps, timelines, photographs. Every piece of information was logged. Every tip was followed. The initial assumption was stranger abduction. Random. Wrong place, wrong time. But as the investigation deepened, certain details began to trouble those working the case. The bicycle bothered them, the way it had been found, not dropped in haste but placed deliberately, the backpack undisturbed. If someone had grabbed Michelle suddenly, violently, there should have been signs of struggle, but there were none. The granola bar suggested she'd been eating it while riding, that she'd stopped, perhaps to talk to someone. Someone she knew, someone she trusted. Investigators began looking more carefully at the people in Michelle's life. They interviewed everyone at the school, teachers, staff, students. Did Michelle have any problems with anyone? Had she mentioned being followed or feeling uncomfortable around anyone? No one could think of anything. She was well-liked, quiet but friendly, no conflicts, no drama. They looked at registered individuals living in the area, 5 within a 3-mile radius. Each was accounted for. Each had alibis that checked out. They expanded the search. 10 miles, 20, nothing connected. They reviewed traffic camera footage from intersections in town. In 2006, such cameras were less common, but there were a few. They spotted Michelle's red bicycle at 318 on Prospect Street, heading north toward home. The image was grainy, but definitely her. Navy hoodie, backpack. After that, nothing. No other cameras captured her. The community continued searching through that first week. Volunteers walked every trail in the state forest. They searched abandoned buildings, an old mill on the outskirts of town, a shuttered motel on Route 7. Nothing. By the end of the second week, the official search operations began to scale back. The volunteer numbers dwindled as people returned to work, to their normal lives. The media attention faded. The Hartley family was left with silence, and the company of investigators who had fewer answers each day. Detective Lindholm began looking at the family itself. Statistics showed that in cases involving missing children, family members were often involved. She didn't want to believe it, but she had to check. Robert's alibi was solid. He'd been at the hardware store from 6:45 that morning until Patricia called him at 4:30. Multiple customers and employees confirmed it. David had been at school, then at jazz band practice until 4. Again, verified. Patricia had been home, alone. But the timeline didn't work. For Patricia to have harmed Michelle, she would have had to intercept her somewhere on the route home, which would have required leaving the house, and neighbors didn't report seeing Patricia's car leave. More importantly, Patricia's grief seemed entirely genuine. Lindholm had seen people fake it before. This wasn't that. This was a mother whose child had been taken, and the pain was real and raw. Clear's throat. They looked at Robert's brother, James Hartley. James lived 40 minutes away in Manchester. He was divorced, worked construction, had a temper according to people who knew him. But on October 12, he'd been on a job site in Rutland with 6 other workers. His cell phone records placed him there all day. They looked at Patricia's coworkers at the library, at neighbors, at the parents of Michelle's friends. Everyone checked out. Everyone had alibis or no motive or no opportunity. The case was going cold, and everyone involved could feel it happening. In November, a hunter found a piece of fabric snagged on a branch deep in the state forest 8 miles from where Michelle had disappeared. It was navy blue, the same color as Michelle's hoodie. The area was searched intensively. Dogs, ground-penetrating radar. They found nothing else. The fabric was sent for analysis. It was from a hoodie same brand as Michelle's, but they couldn't definitively prove it was hers. It could have been anyone's. People wore those hoodies. Half the students at the school had them. Still, the discovery renewed hope and fear in equal measure. Hope that they were close to finding her. Fear of what they would find. December brought snow. The searches became more difficult. Tips continued to come in, but they led nowhere. Someone claimed to have seen Michelle at a shopping mall in New Hampshire. Investigated. Case of mistaken identity. Someone else said they had information about a local man who seemed suspicious. Police interviewed him. He was odd, certainly, but there was no evidence connecting him to Michelle's disappearance. By Christmas, the investigation had slowed to a crawl. Detective Lindholm kept working, kept pushing, but the leads had dried up. The trail was cold. Michelle Hartley had vanished, and no one knew where she was or what had happened to her. Those who knew the family during this time said the change was visible. The life had gone out of them. Patricia moved through her days like a ghost. She stopped working at the library. She couldn't bear being around other people's children. Robert kept the hardware store running, but barely. He made mistakes, forgot orders, snapped at employees. David finished his sophomore year of high school, but his grades plummeted. He gave up the trumpet entirely, sold it at a yard sale without telling anyone. Emma developed anxiety. She refused to ride a bicycle, refused to walk anywhere alone. She clung to Patricia, and Patricia had nothing left to give her. The house on Maple Ridge Road felt hollow. They kept Michelle's room exactly as she'd left it. Her bed made, her books on the shelf, the purple journal on her desk. Waiting. Part 3. The Silence. By the spring of 2007, 6 months after Michelle's disappearance, the Hartley family had learned to live with the absence. Not accept it, that would never happen, but live alongside it, survive it. The community had moved on in the way communities do when tragedy becomes familiar. People still asked how they were doing, but less frequently. The casseroles stopped coming. Life returned to its patterns except for the Hartleys, for whom nothing would ever be the same. Patricia started seeing a therapist in Rutland. Once a week, she drove the 45 minutes and sat in a small office with beige walls and talked about grief and guilt and the desperate need to know. The therapist was kind. She suggested coping mechanisms, breathing exercises, journaling. Patricia tried. She wrote in a notebook late at night when sleep wouldn't come. She wrote about Michelle, about the last morning, about every moment she replayed endlessly, searching for what she'd missed, some sign, some warning. There was nothing, just an ordinary Thursday morning that had become the last morning. Robert threw himself into work. He expanded the hardware store's hours, opened on Sundays. He was there before dawn and stayed until after dark. When he was home, he was distant. He and Patricia barely spoke. They moved around each other carefully, like strangers in a narrow hallway. The grief had built a wall between them. They couldn't help each other because they were both drowning. David started his junior year and seemed better on the surface. His grades improved. He joined the track team. But people who knew him said something had changed fundamentally. He'd grown hard, distant. He didn't talk about Michelle. If someone mentioned her, he'd leave the room. Emma started 5th grade and carried her anxiety like a heavy coat she couldn't take off. She saw a counselor at school. The counselor taught her techniques to manage the panic attacks that came without warning, breathing into a paper bag, counting backwards from 10. Emma tried. Sometimes it helped, sometimes it didn't. Detective Lindholm hadn't given up. She couldn't. Michelle's case stayed on her desk. She reviewed the files periodically, looking for something they'd missed, some connection they hadn't made. In the spring of 2008, she got a call from a detective in Pennsylvania. A girl matching Michelle's description had been found living with a man in Pittsburgh. Lindholm's heart raced as she listened, but the age was wrong. The girl was 14, not 13, and when they checked, she wasn't Michelle. She was a runaway from Ohio, another dead end, another crushing disappointment. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, you understand the corrosive nature of suspicion, how it eats away at certainty, how it makes you question everything. In the fall of 2008, 2 years after Michelle's disappearance, small cracks began to show in David's carefully constructed exterior. He started having nightmares. Patricia would wake to hear him calling out in his sleep. She'd go to his room and find him sitting up in bed, sweating, shaking. He wouldn't talk about the dreams, wouldn't say what he saw, but he started drawing. Dark, chaotic images on sheets of paper he'd crumple up and throw away. Patricia found them in his trash can, trees, shadows, a figure lying on the ground. She showed them to Robert. He said they were just drawings, just a teenager processing trauma, but Patricia felt a knot of unease tightening in her chest. In December of that year, Patricia found something else. She was cleaning David's room while he was at school. She moved his mattress to change the sheets and found a notebook wedged between the mattress and box spring. It wasn't a regular notebook. It was spiral-bound, the cover torn off. Inside were pages of writing, dense, small handwriting that she recognized as David's. She sat on the floor and read. They were journal entries, starting from October 2006, the day Michelle disappeared. The entries were fragmented, stream of consciousness. Some parts made sense, descriptions of the search, of the police asking questions, but other parts were strange, disjointed. I should have stopped it, one entry read. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't say anything. Another entry dated 3 months later. I see her sometimes in the woods. She's trying to tell me something, but I can't hear her. Patricia's hands shook as she turned the pages. The entries grew darker. It's my fault. I could have prevented it. I knew and I didn't stop it. Patricia confronted David that evening. She showed him the notebook. He went pale, grabbed it from her hands. "You had no right," he said. His voice was shaking. Patricia asked him what he meant by the things he'd written. What did he know? David wouldn't answer. He locked himself in his room. Robert came home to find Patricia in tears, David refusing to come out, Emma hiding in the basement. He demanded to know what was happening. Patricia told him about the notebook, about the entries. Robert knocked on David's door, told him to open it. When David finally did, his face was streaked with tears. Robert asked him directly, "Do you know something about what happened to Michelle?" David broke, not with answers but with sobs, great heaving sobs that shook his whole body. He said he didn't know anything, that the journal entries were just guilt. Survivor's guilt, the therapist had called it. He felt like he should have been able to protect his sister, should have walked home with her that day, should have known something was wrong, but he didn't know anything specific. He swore it. He told the police everything he knew 2 years ago. Robert believed him. Patricia wanted to believe him. But doubt, once planted, is hard to uproot. The family fractured further under the weight of suspicion and pain. By the summer of 2009, nearly 3 years after Michelle's disappearance, Robert moved out. He didn't call it separation officially. He said he needed space, needed time to think. He rented an apartment above a storefront on Main Street. Patricia stayed in the house with David and Emma. The silence became oppressive. David left for college that fall, choosing a school in upstate New York as far as he could get while still being relatively close. Emma was 12 now, the same age Michelle had been. The parallel wasn't lost on anyone. Patricia watched her younger daughter with a mixture of fierce protectiveness and haunting sadness. Emma looked so much like Michelle, same dark hair, same thoughtful eyes. Sometimes Patricia would see her sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, and for just a moment, just a split second, she'd forget. She'd think it was Michelle sitting there. Then reality would crash back. The grief was always fresh, always new. It never got easier. Part 4, The Revelation. The break in the case came from an unexpected source in March 2010. 3.5 years after Michelle Hartley disappeared, Emma, now 13, was in therapy. She'd been seeing Dr. Catherine Wells, a psychologist who specialized in childhood trauma, for 8 months. The sessions were helping. Emma was learning to manage her anxiety, learning to talk about her fears. In a session on March 17, 2010, Dr. Wells was using a technique called narrative therapy. She asked Emma to tell the story of October 12, 2006, to describe what she remembered about that day. Emma had done this before, multiple times with multiple therapists and investigators. But this time, something shifted. Some detail emerged that hadn't come up before. Emma said she remembered looking out her bedroom window that afternoon. She'd come home from school at 3:20. Patricia had picked her up that day because Emma had a dentist appointment at 4. Emma had gone to her room to change out of her school clothes. She looked out the window that faced the street. She saw a car parked in front of the house, a dark sedan. She didn't recognize it. And then she saw something that had terrified her, though she didn't understand why at the time, and had pushed it down, locked it away in some protected corner of her mind where frightening things went. She saw a man standing next to the car. He was tall, wearing jeans and a dark jacket, and he was looking at the house, staring at it. Emma had felt frightened. She'd stepped back from the window. When she looked again a few minutes later, the car was gone. Dr. Wells asked careful questions. What color was the car? Emma thought it was dark blue or black. 4 doors. What did the man look like? She couldn't see his face clearly from that angle, but he had dark hair, and he stood in a particular way, very still. Dr. Wells asked if Emma had told anyone about this at the time. Emma shook her head. She'd forgotten about it, she said, or not forgotten exactly, put it away. But now, talking about it, she remembered something else. Something that made her stomach hurt and her hands shake. The man by the car, the way he stood. She'd seen someone stand that way before, someone familiar. Dr. Wells contacted Detective Lindholm immediately. Lindholm drove to Rutland that afternoon and spoke with Emma herself, this time with Dr. Wells present and Patricia giving consent. Emma repeated what she'd said, the dark car, the man. Lindholm asked if Emma could describe anything else about the man, any identifying features. Emma closed her eyes. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that changed everything. He had a watch. I remember the watch because it caught the light. It was silver and shiny, and he kept looking at it while he stood there. Lindholm felt the hairs on her arm stand up. She asked Emma if she knew who the man was. Emma said she wasn't sure, but the way he stood, the watch, it reminded her of someone who Lindholm pressed gently. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Uncle James. Clears throat. James Hartley, Robert's younger brother. He'd been interviewed in 2006 as part of the routine background checks. His alibi for October 12 had been solid. He'd been at a construction site in Rutland all day. But now, with Emma's statement, Lindholm went back through the files. She looked at James's original interview, looked at the timeline. The construction site was 45 minutes from Bennington. James's coworkers said he'd been there all day, but Lindholm checked the specific times. The foreman said James had arrived at 8 in the morning. They'd worked through lunch. James had left at 4:15. 4:15. The timeline was tight, but it was possible, barely possible. If James had left the job site earlier, say around 3, he could have made it to Bennington by 3:45. After Michelle would have passed the spot where her bicycle was found. Lindholm dug deeper. She pulled James's phone records from October 2006. She'd reviewed them before, but not closely. Most of the calls were routine, work, friends, but there was one call that stood out now. At 2:57 on October 12, James had made a call that lasted 32 seconds. The number belonged to a payphone in Bennington, on Prospect Street, 3 blocks from where Michelle's bicycle had been found. Lindholm felt her pulse quicken. She went back to the construction site, spoke with the foreman again. This time she asked specifically about that afternoon. Could the foreman confirm absolutely that James had been there the entire time? The foreman hesitated. He said James had taken a break around mid-afternoon. He'd said he was feeling sick, had been gone for maybe 45 minutes. The foreman had figured he was in the bathroom, hadn't thought much of it. Lindholm obtained a warrant to search James Hartley's residence. He'd moved since 2006, was now living in a small house outside Manchester. The search took place on April 2, 2010. James wasn't home, was at work. The team went through the house methodically. In the basement, inside a toolbox in the corner, they found jewelry, a necklace with a small silver heart pendant. Patricia Hartley later identified it as Michelle's. She'd worn it almost every day. It had been a gift from her grandmother. There was also a bracelet that belonged to Michelle, and folded at the bottom of the toolbox, wrapped in plastic, was a navy blue hoodie with the School Panther logo on the front. Size youth medium. Michelle's size. There were dark stains on the sleeve. The fabric was sent for analysis. The stains tested positive for blood. Michelle's blood. James Hartley was arrested at his workplace at 4:37 that afternoon. He was read his rights. He said nothing, didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't protest, just stared ahead with blank eyes as they put him in handcuffs and led him to the police car. Word spread through Manchester and then to Bennington within the hour. James Hartley, Robert's brother, Michelle's uncle, had been arrested. The man who'd helped search for Michelle in those first desperate weeks. The man who'd comforted Robert and Patricia and told them everything would be okay. He'd been the one all along. The interrogation lasted 6 hours. James sat across from Detective Lindholm and 2 state police investigators in a small room with gray walls and a metal table. At first, he denied everything. Said he didn't know how Michelle's things ended up in his house. Someone must have planted them, but the evidence was overwhelming. The phone call, the witness placing a car matching his at the Hartley house, Emma's statement, the jewelry, the hoodie. Finally, at 11:43 that night, James broke. He asked for a lawyer, but before the lawyer arrived, he made a statement. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he said. "It was an accident." The full story emerged over the following weeks through additional interviews and evidence analysis. On October 12, 2006, James had left the construction site at 2:50. He told his foreman he was sick, but he wasn't. He'd been planning this. He'd driven to Bennington. He'd called the payphone on Prospect Street from his cell phone at 2:57, establishing that he was in the area. He'd parked his car on Maple Ridge Road in front of Robert and Patricia's house. He'd waited. He knew Michelle's route home, knew what time she usually arrived. When he saw her coming up the street on her bicycle at approximately 3:40, he got out of his car. He called to her. She stopped. She trusted him. He was her uncle. He told her he wanted to talk to her about something, about a surprise for her father's birthday. She got off her bike. He asked her to sit in the car with him for a minute. She hesitated but complied. He drove her to a wooded area off a logging road 10 miles outside town. What happened there, he claimed, was an accident. He tried to restrain her. She'd fought. She'd hit her head. He'd panicked. He'd buried her in a shallow grave and covered it with leaves and branches. He'd taken her things, kept them. He couldn't explain why, as trophies, as proof of what he'd done, as penance. He didn't know. The search teams found Michelle's remains on April 8, 2010, exactly where James said they'd be. The logging road off Route 7, the woods, the shallow grave. She'd been there all along, less than 15 miles from home. The medical examiner determined cause of expiry consistent with what James had described. The family was notified. Patricia collapsed when they told her. Robert sat in silence, staring at nothing. David drove home from college and didn't speak for 3 days. Emma held her mother's hand and cried quietly, and somehow in the terrible finality of knowing, there was a splinter of relief. The not knowing had been unbearable. Now they knew. Now they could grieve properly. Now they could begin to heal, though that healing would take years, decades, perhaps lifetimes. The trial of James Hartley began in September 2010. He pleaded not guilty despite his confession, which his lawyer tried to have suppressed. The motion was denied. The evidence was presented piece by piece. The phone records, the witness testimony, Emma's statement about seeing the car and the man who moved like Uncle James, the jewelry found in his toolbox, the hoodie with Michelle's blood, the confession itself, recorded and played for the jury. The prosecution argued that this was premeditated, that James had planned it, had waited for his opportunity. The defense argued it was an accident, a moment of panic that spiraled out of control, that James had mental health issues, that he'd been under stress. Robert testified. He spoke about his brother, about how they'd grown up together, about how he trusted him, about how James had helped search for Michelle, had come to the house, had looked him in the eye and lied. Patricia testified. She described Michelle, who she was, what she meant to their family, what had been taken from them. David testified briefly, said he'd looked up to his uncle, had believed he was a good person. Emma did not testify. She was too young, too fragile. Her statement was read into the record instead. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. On October 15, 2010, 4 years and 3 days after Michelle Hartley disappeared, James Hartley was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The media coverage was extensive. National news again. The small Vermont town that had been torn apart by tragedy. The family betrayed by one of their own. Some people said they'd always suspected James, said there was something off about him. Others said they'd never have guessed. He'd seemed so normal, so helpful. How could someone do that to their own niece? What kind of person was capable of such deception? The truth, as Detective Lindholm said in an interview after the trial, was that predators often hid in plain sight. They were good at seeming normal, at blending in, at being trusted. That was how they operated. The Hartley family tried to rebuild. Patricia and Robert divorced in 2011. The marriage couldn't survive the weight of what had happened, but they remained cordial, cooperative. They both attended Emma's school events. They both visited Michelle's grave together on her birthday every year. David finished college, became a social worker, dedicated his life to helping children in crisis. Emma eventually went to therapy school herself. She wanted to help others the way Dr. Wells had helped her. The house on Maple Ridge Road was sold. Neither Patricia nor Robert could live there anymore. Too many memories, too much pain. A new family bought it. They painted it different colors, planted new flowers in the garden. Life went on as it always does, but the echoes of October 2006 remained. Michelle's story became part of Bennington's history, a reminder that evil could exist anywhere, that trust could be misplaced, that vigilance was necessary, but also that justice, even when delayed, could still arrive, that the truth, no matter how painful, was better than endless uncertainty, that those who had been silenced could still, in the end, be heard. If this story mattered to you, if it reminded you that justice is worth fighting for no matter how long it takes, consider this a call to action. Share this story. Remember Michelle Hartley. Remember that behind every cold case is a family still waiting, still hopping, still grieving. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard. Their stories matter. Their truth matters. The pursuit of justice matters, always.